After 18 years of marriage, I found a box of love letters in his closet. All dated this year, none addressed to me. I read every word. Next morning, he found them spread across the breakfast table, next to his coffee, and a note that changed everything. The passport folder should have been right there on the top shelf. Christopher always kept our important documents in the same burgundy leather folder. Birth certificates, marriage license, social security cards, and those 2 navy blue passports we'd used for our anniversary trip to Italy 3 years ago. Our weekend getaway to the mountains was supposed to be spontaneous, romantic even. Just the 2 of us, no phones, no distractions. I was excited, humming while I rifled through our walk-in closet. But the folder wasn't where it belonged. I pushed aside Christopher's winter coats, the heavy wool one I'd bought him last Christmas still smelling faintly of his cologne. Behind the thick fabric, my fingers brushed against something unexpected, smooth, polished wood. A box I'd never seen before, roughly the size of a shoebox but crafted from what looked like cherry wood, with delicate brass hinges that caught the overhead light. My heart began to race, though I couldn't explain why. Something about the way it was hidden, deliberately tucked behind the coats where I'd never think to look, sent a chill down my spine. The weight of it surprised me as I lifted it out. Heavier than expected, substantial. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it to our bed, that California king we'd picked out together when we moved into this house 12 years ago. The lid opened with a soft creak. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these deeply personal stories. If you believe that marriages can survive even the most devastating betrayals through honesty and courage, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more couples who need hope. Now let's see how this unfolds. 13 envelopes lay nestled inside, each one cream-colored and pristine, tied together with a silk scarf I recognized, the emerald green one Christopher had given me for Mother's Day 2 years ago. The same scarf I'd worn to our daughter Emma's graduation. The irony wasn't lost on me that my own gift was being used to bind together secrets I knew nothing about. Christopher's handwriting was unmistakable, those distinctive loops and careful slants I'd seen on birthday cards, grocery lists and love notes for 18 years. But these weren't addressed to me. Each envelope bore the same name in his careful script, Ashley. My fingers went numb. Ashley. The name echoed in my mind like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of confusion and dread through my thoughts. I didn't know any Ashley. Christopher had never mentioned an Ashley. Yet here were 13 letters, all bearing recent dates, some from just weeks ago. The first envelope felt fragile in my hands, as if it might crumble under the weight of whatever secrets it contained. I slid my finger under the flap, the paper giving way with a whisper. The letter inside was written on Christopher's personal stationery, the kind with his initials embossed at the top that he used for formal correspondence. "My dearest Ashley," it began. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the edge of our bed, the same bed where Christopher and I had shared morning coffee, late-night conversations, and countless intimate moments. Now it felt foreign, tainted by the presence of these letters that spoke of a life I didn't know existed. "Do you remember that little coffee shop near campus? The one with the crooked tables and the barista who always drew hearts in the foam? I walked past it yesterday during my business trip to Portland, and I swear I could still smell the cinnamon rolls we used to share. You always ordered yours with extra icing and I'd tease you about having a sweet tooth. But secretly, I loved watching you lick the sugar from your fingers, completely unself-conscious and beautiful." My throat constricted. College. Portland. A business trip he'd taken just last month, returning with stories about boring meetings and bad hotel coffee. He'd never mentioned walking through his old campus. He'd never mentioned remembering someone named Ashley. I forced myself to continue reading, though each word felt like a small betrayal. The letter described shared memories I'd never heard, study sessions that turned into deep conversations, walks through autumn leaves, a moment under the campus library stairs where they'd almost kissed but didn't. The tenderness in his words was unmistakable, the kind of raw emotion I thought he reserved only for me. With shaking hands I reached for the second letter. Then the third. Each one revealed more pieces of a puzzle I didn't know existed. Ashley wasn't just a memory, she was a living, breathing presence in Christopher's heart. The letters spoke of recent dreams where she appeared, of wondering what their children might have looked like, of regret so deep it seemed to consume him. "I saw a woman at the grocery store last week who looked just like you," One letter read. Same auburn hair, same way of tilting her head when she laughed. For a moment my heart stopped. I actually followed her down the cereal aisle before I realized what I was doing. The poor woman probably thought I was some kind of stalker. But for those few seconds, I let myself imagine what it would be like to run into you, to see you smile at me the way you used to. The dates on the letters painted a timeline of secret longing. February, March, April, May. While I was planning our anniversary dinner, he was writing love letters to another woman. While I was picking out new curtains for our bedroom, he was pouring his heart out to someone from his past. Some letters were angry, not at Ashley but at himself. He wrote about the choices he'd made, the paths not taken, the life he'd built that sometimes felt like a consolation prize. Those words cut the deepest because they implied that our marriage, our family, our entire life together was somehow second best. But it was the 13th letter, dated just 2 weeks ago, that shattered something inside me completely. I've carried this love for you for 21 years in absolute silence, Ashley. Not a day has passed that I haven't thought of you, wondered about you, loved you from afar. But I never told Jessica about you. I never told her that part of my heart has always belonged to someone else. I didn't want to break her heart. She's a good woman, a wonderful mother, and she deserves better than to know she's been sharing her husband with a ghost. But I can't carry this alone anymore. I need you to know that you were my first love, my truest love, and if I could go back and choose differently, I would choose you every time. The letter fell from my hands, floating to the hardwood floor like a dying leaf. Jessica. He'd written my name like I was a character in someone else's story, a supporting player in the drama of his real life. 21 years. He'd loved her for 21 years, which meant he'd loved her even before he met me. Our entire relationship had been built on the foundation of his unfinished business with another woman. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears, too complete for any normal emotional response. I just sat there in the silence of our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's secret life, feeling hollow and weightless, as if I might simply float away and disappear. The woman I'd been when I woke up that morning, Christopher's wife, Emma's mother, a woman secure in her marriage and her place in the world, that woman was gone. In her place sat a stranger holding love letters that were never meant for her, understanding finally that she'd been living someone else's life all along. The letters scattered around me on the bedroom floor became a cruel backdrop for the flood of memories that suddenly demanded re-examination. 24 years old, fresh out of college, working my first real job at the marketing firm downtown. That's who I was when Christopher walked into my life. Or rather, when I walked into his apartment building's laundry room and found him staring helplessly at my broken toaster. I think I can fix this, he'd said, holding up the burnt appliance with a sheepish grin. His hands were gentle as he worked, explaining something about heating elements and electrical connections that I pretended to understand just to keep him talking. Those same hands that had written love letters to Ashley just 2 weeks ago. The memory shifted, taking on a sinister new quality. Had he been thinking of her even then? When he'd successfully repaired my toaster and I'd impulsively invited him for coffee to celebrate, had some part of his mind been elsewhere, comparing my laugh to hers, my smile to whatever he remembered of Ashley's? Our first apartment, that tiny studio with the slanted ceiling and radiator that clanged all night. We'd pushed all the furniture against the walls one evening and danced to an old jazz record I'd found at a thrift store. No music lessons, no choreography, just two people moving together in bare feet on cold hardwood floors. Christopher had spun me around until I was dizzy with laughter, and when the song ended he'd pulled me close and whispered, "I could do this forever." But did he mean it? Or was he thinking about dancing with someone else, someone with auburn hair who tilted her head when she laughed? The proposal. God, the proposal. We'd been walking home from dinner when the sky opened up. One of those sudden summer storms that appear out of nowhere. Instead of running for shelter, Christopher had stopped right there on the sidewalk, rain soaking through his shirt, water dripping from his hair. He'd reached into his pocket and I'd started laughing because I thought he was going for his phone to call an Uber. "Jessica," he'd said, and his voice had this quality I'd never heard before, urgent, almost desperate. "I can't wait another second." I'd said yes before he'd even finished getting down on one knee, before he'd managed to open the ring box with his rain-slicked fingers. The diamond had looked impossibly bright against the gray storm, and I'd thought it was the most romantic moment of my life. Now I wondered, had the urgency in his voice been love or guilt? Had he been trying to convince himself as much as propose to me? Emma's birth. Our daughter arriving 3 weeks early after 14 hours of labor that left me exhausted and trembling. Christopher had held my hand through every contraction, whispering encouragements, wiping sweat from my forehead with a damp cloth. When Emma finally emerged red-faced and screaming, he'd cried harder than I had. "She's perfect," he'd sobbed, kissing my forehead, my cheeks, my hands. "You're both perfect. I love you so much." But which had he meant? Was Ashley somewhere in that hospital room with us, an invisible presence sharing what should have been our most intimate moment? My father's funeral 2 years later hit me like a physical blow all over again. Dad had been sick for months, but I'd convinced myself he'd recover. When the call came at 3 in the morning, Christopher had held me while I fell apart, his arms strong and steady around my shaking shoulders. He'd handled everything: the funeral arrangements, the flowers, the endless stream of casseroles from neighbors. He'd written my father's eulogy when I couldn't find the words, and he'd read it at the service because my voice kept breaking. Standing graveside, watching dirt fall onto my father's casket, I'd leaned into Christopher's warmth and felt grateful for his unwavering presence. He'd been my rock, my anchor, the one constant in a world that suddenly felt uncertain and fragile. But had part of him been wishing Ashley was there to comfort him through his own grief at watching me suffer? The signs had been there, hadn't they? Those moments when we'd be talking about our college years and his eyes would go distant, unfocused, as if he was seeing something I couldn't. I'd assumed he was remembering late-night study sessions or weekend parties. Normal nostalgia for a time when life was simpler. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd made different choices back then?" he'd asked once out of nowhere, while we were watching Emma play in our backyard sandbox. "What kind of different choices?" I'd asked, genuinely curious. He'd been quiet for so long I'd thought he hadn't heard me. Then, nothing specific. Just, "You know how it is. Wondering about roads not taken." I'd laughed it off, made some joke about how the road we'd taken had led us to Emma and this house and Sunday morning pancakes, so clearly we'd chosen well. He'd smiled and kissed my temple, but something in his expression had remained distant, almost melancholy. Now I understood. He hadn't been thinking about abstract choices or philosophical whats. He'd been thinking about Ashley. The oldies station in the car would sometimes play songs from the late 90s, early 2000s, music from our college years. I'd try to sing along, maybe reach over and turn up the volume, but Christopher would go quiet, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. I'd attributed it to his general dislike of loud music, his preference for talk radio or classical. But those were Ashley's songs, weren't they? The soundtrack to whatever romance had played out between them while I was living my own oblivious college life across the country. How many times had I misread his silences? How many moments of what I'd thought was contentment had actually been him fighting memories of someone else? When he'd stare out the kitchen window while I made dinner, was he seeing our garden, or was he seeing Ashley's face? The cruelest realization was that Christopher had been a good husband. He'd never missed an anniversary, never forgotten a birthday. He'd brought me flowers every Friday for the first 5 years of our marriage just because. He'd rubbed my feet when I was pregnant, gotten up for midnight feedings without complaint, taught Emma to ride a bike and helped her with algebra homework and walked her to the bus stop every morning until she decided she was too old for parental escorts. But had it all been an elaborate performance? A carefully constructed life built to bury his real feelings? Or, and this possibility terrified me more, had he genuinely loved me while simultaneously loving someone else, compartmentalizing his heart in ways I couldn't fathom? The worst part was the uncertainty. I could handle betrayal, even emotional infidelity, if I understood its dimensions. But this felt like trying to solve a puzzle where half the pieces were missing. Had our entire marriage been authentic, just incomplete? Or had I been living with a stranger who'd gotten very good at pretending? The woman staring back at me from our bedroom mirror looked hollow-eyed and lost, holding the fragments of a life that might have been built on sand. Everything I'd thought I knew, about Christopher, about us, about the story of our love, suddenly felt as fragile and uncertain as those letters scattered across our floor. The hollowness followed me into a restless sleep, and I woke at 4:47 a.m. with the kind of clarity that only comes from emotional exhaustion. The house felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, smaller somehow, as if the walls had contracted around secrets I could no longer ignore. Christopher slept beside me, his breathing steady and untroubled, one arm flung across the space where I usually curled against his chest. I slipped out of bed without disturbing him, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. The morning routine felt automatic. Fill the coffee maker, measure the grounds, set the timer. But every familiar motion carried new weight. This was the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of breakfasts, where Emma had eaten her first solid food, where Christopher had surprised me with birthday cake at midnight 3 years running. The 13 letters lay exactly where I'd left them on our bed, scattered like fallen leaves. I gathered them carefully, my hands steadier now than they'd been the night before. Each envelope felt lighter somehow, as if reading them had drained away their power to shock me. But their weight in my arms was substantial, the physical manifestation of 21 years of hidden longing. I arranged them on our kitchen table with methodical precision, fanning them out like tarot cards that had already revealed their devastating fortune. The cream-colored paper caught the under-cabinet lighting, and Christopher's careful handwriting seemed to glow in the semi-darkness. Ashley, Ashley, Ashley. Her name repeated across the envelopes like an incantation. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with its familiar rhythm. I pulled Christopher's favorite mug from the cabinet, the navy blue one Emma had made in her high school ceramics class, slightly lopsided but functional, with "World's Best Dad" painted in her careful adolescent script. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was serving what might be our last normal morning coffee in a cup that celebrated his role as a father while I grappled with his failure as a husband. I found a paper napkin in the drawer, one of the everyday white ones we used for quick meals and weekend lunches. Nothing fancy, nothing dramatic, just a simple square of paper that would hold what felt like the most important words I'd ever written. The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand, as if it weighed 50 pounds instead of ounces. I stared at the blank napkin for several minutes, searching for the right words. Anger would have been easier. Accusations, demands, threats. But anger felt too small for this moment, too reactive for the magnitude of what I'd discovered. "You have my permission to marry her," I wrote, the ink flowing smoothly across the paper. No hard feelings. Just truth. The words looked stark and final on the napkin, but they felt right. Not vindictive or bitter, just honest. I wasn't giving him permission out of generosity. I was acknowledging that I couldn't compete with a ghost, couldn't fight a battle I'd never known I was losing. 21 years of loving someone else in silence had earned him the right to stop pretending. I signed my name at the bottom, Jessica, and placed the napkin beside his coffee mug. The scene looked almost normal from a distance, like any other morning arrangement of breakfast items. Only the letters spread across the table revealed the truth of what was happening. The overnight bag came together quickly. A change of clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. I avoided looking at the framed photos on our dresser, the vacation souvenirs, the small accumulations of a shared life that now felt like museum pieces from someone else's marriage. Emma's door was still closed when I passed her room, but I could hear her alarm going off, that annoying pop song she'd chosen specifically because it was impossible to ignore. I knocked softly and slipped inside without waiting for an answer. She was already sitting up in bed, her dark hair tousled from sleep, looking so much like Christopher that my chest tightened. "Mom, you're up early. I need to go stay with Aunt May for a day or two," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Nothing for you to worry about. Just some grown-up stuff I need to work through." Emma's 17-year-old radar for parental drama activated immediately. "Is everything okay with you and Dad?" I reached over and smoothed her hair back from her forehead, the same gesture I'd used to comfort her since she was small. "We're going to be fine. I just need some space to think about some things. You be good, okay? And if you need anything, call me." She nodded, but I could see the questions in her eyes, the worry that came from being old enough to sense when something was seriously wrong but young enough to feel powerless to fix it. I hugged her longer than usual, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, trying to memorize the feeling of being needed by someone who loved me without conditions or complications. The drive to May's house took 15 minutes through empty suburban streets. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft pastels that seemed too beautiful for such a devastating morning. I parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house where my sister had built her own version of domestic happiness, different from mine but equally real, equally fragile. May opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been waiting for me. She was already dressed despite the early hour, her graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her eyes alert with concern. Coffee? She asked, stepping aside to let me in. I just made some for Christopher, I said, then felt the bitter irony of those words. The coffee I'd made to accompany his discovery of my note, his realization that I knew about Ashley, his recognition that our marriage had just shifted into unknown territory. May nodded and disappeared into her kitchen, returning with a steaming mug of tea instead. Earl Grey with a slice of lemon, exactly how she'd made it for me during every crisis since we were children. She set it on the coffee table beside her couch and settled into the opposite chair, waiting. That's who May had always been. The sister who didn't need explanations, who created space for whatever needed to happen. She'd sat with me like this when I'd failed my driver's test, when my college boyfriend had broken up with me, when I'd struggled with postpartum depression after Emma was born. Never pushing, never demanding details, just present and steady and unshakable. I spent the morning staring at the photographs covering her mantle, family pictures spanning decades, including several of Christopher and me from happier times. Our wedding day, Emma's baptism, last Christmas morning with everyone gathered around May's tree. In one photo from our honeymoon in Greece, Christopher and I were laughing at something off camera, our faces bright with the kind of joy that looked almost foreign to me now. I stood up and walked over to that particular frame, studying our younger selves. Had Ashley been in his thoughts even then, on our honeymoon, while we were discovering the ancient ruins of Santorini and making love in our hotel room overlooking the Aegean Sea? The question felt like a physical weight in my chest. Without thinking, I reached out and turned the frame face down on the mantle. The small action felt both petty and necessary, a tiny rebellion against the woman I used to be, the one who'd believed in fairy tales and forever promises and the fantasy that love was simple and pure and unconditional. May watched from her chair but said nothing, and I loved her for that silence, for understanding that some moments required witness rather than commentary. The afternoon stretched endlessly at May's house, each hour marked by the steady tick of her grandfather clock and the occasional murmur of neighbors going about their ordinary lives. I found myself checking my phone obsessively, though I wasn't sure what I expected. An angry call, desperate voicemails, radio silence. The uncertainty felt worse than any specific response would have. At 6:47 p.m. my phone buzzed. The message was shorter than I'd anticipated, lacking the elaborate explanations or frantic apologies I'd imagined. Just 17 words that somehow managed to acknowledge everything and nothing simultaneously. Love that never lived isn't love. It's longing. And you were never second place. I read it 3 times, then showed it to May without explanation. She adjusted her reading glasses, studied the screen, and handed it back with a slight nod that could have meant anything. He's coming over, I said, though Christopher hadn't mentioned that in his text. Something about the tone, the careful choice of words, told me he wouldn't leave things hanging in digital space. He was the kind of man who needed to see faces, to gauge reactions, to finish difficult conversations in person. 20 minutes later, his truck pulled into May's driveway with the familiar rumble of an engine that needed new mufflers. I watched from behind her living room curtains as he sat in the cab for several minutes, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house like it might hold answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. When he finally knocked, May answered the door with the same calm efficiency she'd shown all day. "She's on the porch," I heard her say, followed by the sound of the screen door closing behind him. The porch swing had been May's addition when she'd bought this house 15 years ago. A wide wooden seat with faded blue cushions that had weathered countless seasons and family gatherings. Christopher approached it hesitantly, as if unsure whether he was welcome to sit beside me. "Hey, he asked, gesturing to the empty space. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. The swing creaked under his weight, a sound I'd heard dozens of times during family barbecues and holiday visits, but tonight it felt loaded with significance. We sat in silence for several minutes, watching the sun set behind May's neighbor's oak tree, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed inappropriate for such a heavy moment. "I found them this morning," he said finally. "The letters, the note. I sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours just staring at your handwriting." His voice carried a quality I'd rarely heard, vulnerability stripped of any attempt at control or explanation. No defensiveness, no immediate rush to justify or minimize what I'd discovered. "The coffee got cold," he continued, a small smile flickering across his face. "First time in 18 years I've let your coffee go to waste." "Tell me about her," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice. Not the Ashley from the letters. The real one. The one you knew. Christopher leaned back against the swing's wooden slats, his eyes focused on something far beyond May's carefully tended garden. We were lab partners senior year. Organic chemistry. She was brilliant. The kind of brilliant that made everything look effortless. She'd show up to class 5 minutes late with coffee stains on her shirt and still understand concepts that left me staring at textbooks until midnight. I found myself genuinely curious about this woman who'd occupied such a large space in my husband's heart. What happened between you? Nothing. Everything. We spent that entire semester in study groups, walking across campus after late sessions in the library, talking about everything except what was happening between us. There was this moment the week before graduation outside the chemistry building. We were both heading to our cars and she stopped walking and turned to look at me. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his jacket. A nervous habit I'd noticed countless times over the years but never connected to anything specific. She said, "In another life we would have been something amazing." And I just stood there like an idiot watching her walk away. By the time I worked up the courage to call her, she'd already moved to Seattle for graduate school. Different coast, different life. "But you kept loving her," I said. It wasn't a question. "I kept wondering," he corrected. "About timing, about chances not taken, about whether the biggest mistake of my life was letting her disappear without telling her how I felt. And then I met you 6 months later and you were so alive, so present, so real." Ashley became this ghost I carried, not because she was better than you, but because she was unfinished business. The honesty in his voice was almost painful to hear. I'd expected defensiveness, attempts to minimize his feelings for Ashley or maximize his feelings for me. Instead, he was offering something much more complex and difficult to process. "Those letters," I said. Were you planning to send them?" Christopher shook his head. "They were therapy. My own pathetic way of trying to finally put her to rest. I thought if I could write down everything I'd never said, maybe I could stop carrying it around. The plan was to burn them once I'd gotten it all out. But you kept them instead." "I kept them because burning them felt like erasing the only proof that those feelings had been real. And I wasn't ready to let go of being the man who'd loved 2 women, even if one of them never knew it." The question I'd been avoiding all day finally forced its way out. Was I ever enough? He turned to face me fully for the first time since sitting down, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes, not the dramatic kind that accompany grand apologies, but the quiet kind that come with genuine grief. "You were everything," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "You were morning coffee and midnight fevers and Emma's first steps. You were real life, real love, real partnership. Ashley was a dream I never let myself wake up from. But dreams aren't life, Jessica. They're just longing dressed up in what-ifs." The tears came then, not the angry sobs I'd expected but something softer, more like relief. We sat in the growing darkness, the porch swing moving gently back and forth, while 18 years of marriage rearranged themselves in my mind. "I don't know how to forgive this," I said eventually. "I don't even know if forgiveness is the right word for what needs to happen." "I don't either," he admitted. "I just know I don't want to lose you because I was too much of a coward to deal with my own ghosts." I looked at this man I'd shared a life with, seeing him perhaps more clearly than I ever had. Flawed, human, carrying wounds I'd never known existed. The Christopher sitting beside me wasn't the perfect husband I'd imagined I'd married, but he was real in a way that felt both terrifying and oddly comforting. "Thank you," I said finally, "for being honest." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it felt like the beginning of something. Maybe not the marriage we'd had before, but possibly something more genuine, built on truth instead of the comfortable illusions we'd both been maintaining. 3 days at May's had felt like a lifetime, but returning home felt like stepping into a museum of our former life. Christopher had driven me back in silence, both of us acutely aware that we were crossing a threshold into unknown territory. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Same red mailbox, same potted geraniums on the front steps that I'd planted in April, but everything felt different. The wooden box sat exactly where I'd left it on our bedroom dresser, untouched but somehow transformed. The cherry wood seemed less ominous now, more like what it actually was, just a container that had held secrets too heavy for one person to carry alone. The emerald scarf lay folded neatly beside it, no longer binding the letters together but somehow still present, like a witness to everything that had unfolded. "You didn't hide it," I observed, running my fingers along the box's smooth edge. What would be the point? Christopher replied from the doorway. Besides, it was never really mine to hide. Those letters, they were as much about you as they were about her. About the man I was when I wasn't being honest with either of us. Emma appeared at dinner that evening, her teenage radar for family drama finely tuned as always. She studied our faces across the kitchen table, clearly noting the careful way we moved around each other, the deliberate politeness that had replaced our usual comfortable familiarity. "Are you guys getting divorced?" she asked with the brutal directness that only 17-year-olds possess. "We're figuring some things out," I said, catching Christopher's eye across the table. "But no, we're not getting divorced." "Good," Emma said, stabbing her pasta with unnecessary force. "Because I cannot handle any more drama before senior year. I have enough stress with college applications." Her matter-of-fact acceptance somehow made the moment feel both lighter and more real. This was our family. Imperfect, complicated, but still ours to figure out. Later that evening, Christopher found me in the living room, curled up in the reading chair with a cup of tea growing cold beside me. He settled onto the couch, maintaining careful distance but clearly wanting to talk. "I need to tell you about her laugh," he said suddenly. Ashley's laugh was infectious. The kind that made everyone around her start laughing too, even if they hadn't heard the joke. She'd throw her whole head back, completely unself-conscious. I felt a flicker of something that might have been jealousy but pushed it aside. "Tell me more." She read everything. Fiction, poetry, dense philosophy texts that she'd quote at random moments. Her favorite book was The Unbearable Lightness of Being. She carried a battered paperback copy everywhere. Said it reminded her that everything was both meaningful and meaningless at the same time. As he spoke, I found myself building a mental picture of this woman who'd inhabited such a large corner of my husband's heart. Not the threatening phantom I'd imagined, but a real person with quirks and passions and the kind of intellectual intensity that would have appealed to Christopher's serious nature. "She sounds wonderful," I said and meant it. Christopher looked surprised. "I thought you'd hate hearing about her." "I thought I would too. But hating her feels pointless. She didn't know about me, didn't choose to be your secret. And honestly, if she was important enough for you to carry around for 21 years, then she must have been pretty special." Something shifted in Christopher's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude for permission to remember someone fondly without it feeling like a betrayal. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you believe in fresh starts and clean slates. Christopher appeared in the kitchen with the wooden box under his arm and a determined expression I recognized from major household projects. "I want to burn them," he said without preamble. "All of them. Would you do it with me?" The request surprised me with its intimacy. This wasn't something he needed to do alone anymore. It was something we could do together. A ritual that acknowledged the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. We built a fire in the backyard pit we'd installed 2 summers ago for Emma's friend gatherings. The flames caught quickly, sending sparks up into the crisp air. Christopher opened the box one final time, removing the 13 letters with ceremony but no drama. "Should we read them first?" I asked. "One last time." He shook his head. "I know what they say. And you've already seen enough." The first letter caught fire immediately, Christopher's careful handwriting disappearing into orange and gold flames. Ashley's name curled and blackened, then vanished entirely. We fed the letters to the fire one by one, watching 21 years of longing transform into smoke and ash. "She would have liked you," Christopher said as the 5th letter dissolved into embers. "Ashley, you have the same stubbornness, the same way of seeing through nonsense." "Maybe in another life we could have been friends," I replied and felt surprised by how much I meant it. The 13th and final letter, the one that had shattered my understanding of our marriage, resisted the flames for a moment longer than the others. I watched the paper curl at the edges, saw my own name disappear first, followed by Ashley's until only meaningless ash remained. As the last fragments crumbled into the fire, I found myself whispering words I hadn't planned. We did the best we could even with what we didn't say. Christopher heard me. His hand found mine in the growing darkness, fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of 18 years together but somehow feeling new, unencumbered by the weight of secrets we no longer had to carry. He didn't respond with words, just squeezed my hand gently as we watched the fire burn down to glowing coals. The silence felt different than it had for months. not heavy with unspoken truths, but peaceful in the way that comes after difficult conversations have been completed. That night we went to bed without grand declarations or renewed vows. No promises about perfect love or fairy tale endings. Just two people who'd decided that imperfect honesty was better than comfortable illusions, that truth, even painful truth, was a stronger foundation than the prettiest lies. Christopher fell asleep first, his breathing steady and untroubled in a way I hadn't heard in months. I lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling and processing the strange lightness I felt. We weren't the couple we'd been a week ago, and we'd never be that couple again. But maybe, if we were careful and brave and very honest with each other, we could become something better. Something real enough to last, built on who we actually were instead of who we'd pretended to be. The wooden box sat empty on the dresser, no longer hiding anything, just waiting to be filled with whatever came next. The empty wooden box became an unexpected compass for our new beginning. In the weeks that followed the burning ceremony, Christopher and I moved around each other with the careful attention of people learning to dance together for the first time. Not the passionate urgency of newlyweds, but something more deliberate, the conscious choice to build intimacy from honesty rather than habit. Our first new ritual emerged organically on a Tuesday evening when neither of us felt like eating alone. Christopher appeared in the kitchen doorway as I contemplated the contents of our refrigerator, both of us still navigating the strange politeness that had replaced our easy familiarity. "Want to cook something together?" he asked, his voice carrying the tentative quality of someone testing uncertain ground. We settled on pasta. Simple enough to manage without elaborate coordination, complex enough to require actual collaboration. I chopped vegetables while he prepared the sauce, our movements creating a careful choreography around each other. When our hands brushed reaching for the same wooden spoon, neither of us pulled away immediately. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. "Emma called," Christopher mentioned, stirring the simmering tomatoes. "She wants to know if we're acting normal again for her birthday next month." "What did you tell her?" "That we're working on a new version of normal. One that might actually be better than the old one." Dinner tasted different that night. Not because the food was exceptional, but because we'd created it together without pretending everything was fine. We talked about Emma's college applications, the neighbor's new fence, the weather forecast. Ordinary conversations that felt extraordinary because we were having them as people who'd decided to stop lying to each other. Walking became our second ritual. Short loops around our neighborhood at first, then longer routes that took us past the elementary school where Emma had learned to ride a bike, the park where we'd had countless family picnics, the coffee shop where we sometimes stopped for weekend breakfast. These walks felt like reclaiming familiar territory, seeing our shared landscape through eyes that were no longer clouded by secrets. "I used to wonder if you were happy," Christopher said during one of these walks, 3 weeks after the letter burning. "Really happy, not just content or comfortable." I was too afraid to ask because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Were you happy?" I asked in return. He considered this for several steps before answering. "I was happy in moments. Watching you teach Emma to braid her hair, seeing you laugh at terrible movies, the way you hummed while folding laundry. But I was carrying so much guilt about Ashley that I couldn't let myself be completely present for the happiness." These conversations felt like archaeological excavations, carefully uncovering layers of our relationship that had been buried under years of polite avoidance and comfortable assumptions. The couple's therapy began in November, in Dr. Martinez's office with its soft lighting and strategically placed tissue boxes. I'd resisted the idea initially. Therapy felt like admitting failure, like broadcasting our private struggles to a stranger. But our first session revealed how much we'd been trying to solve complex emotional problems with insufficient tools. "Guilt is a particularly insidious emotion," Dr. Martinez explained during our third visit. "It convinces us that suffering in silence is somehow noble, that protecting others from difficult truths is an act of love. But silence often causes more damage than honesty." Christopher nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I thought I was protecting Jessica by not telling her about Ashley. I thought I was being a good husband by carrying that burden alone." "And Jessica," Dr. Martinez turned to me, "how did it feel to discover that protection? Like being told I wasn't strong enough to handle the truth. Like 18 years of partnership was actually me living in a carefully constructed fantasy while Christopher dealt with the real complexities alone." The sessions forced us to examine patterns we'd never questioned. Christopher's tendency to withdraw when facing emotional difficulty. My habit of smoothing over conflicts before we'd actually resolved them. The way we'd both learn to interpret silence as peace rather than recognizing it as avoidance. Homework from therapy spilled into our daily life. Asking direct questions instead of making assumptions. Sharing immediate reactions rather than waiting for better moments. Learning to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to fix or explain it away. The journal started as an assignment from Dr. Martinez. Write down things that feel true each day, even if they're contradictory, but evolved into something more personal. I bought a simple composition notebook and wrote things that still matter on the cover in careful block letters. Some entries were single words: coffee, Emma's laugh, honesty. Other days, whole pages poured out. Reflections on memories that felt different now, observations about Christopher that I'd never articulated, questions about what kind of marriage we were building from the ashes of our assumptions. On a particularly difficult day in December, I wrote simply, Christopher. Still here. Spring brought unexpected lightness. Not the forced cheerfulness of people trying to convince themselves everything was fine, but the genuine ease that comes from no longer carrying secrets. Christopher started singing in the shower again, old songs I hadn't heard in years. I found myself actually listening when he told stories about his workday instead of just waiting for my turn to speak. Emma noticed the change during her spring break visit home from her first year of college. "You guys seem different," she said over dinner. "Like you actually like each other again." "We're learning how," I replied, catching Christopher's eye across the table. "Good," Emma said pragmatically. Because I was getting tired of feeling like I needed to be the family therapist every time I came home. The first family dinner we hosted after the crisis happened almost exactly 1 year later. A casual Sunday gathering with May, Emma, and Christopher's brother David and his family. I'd been nervous about it, wondering if our rebuilt foundation was strong enough to support the weight of normal family dynamics. But the afternoon unfolded with surprising naturalness. Christopher and David argued good-naturedly about football while helping me set the table. Emma played DJ from her phone, filling the house with music that spanned 3 generations of family favorites. May brought her famous apple pie in the kind of gentle presence that made everything feel possible. "Remember when you used to make us dance in the living room after dinner?" Emma asked while we cleared dessert plates. "We still could," Christopher said, looking at me with raised eyebrows. "So we did. Cleared the furniture to the sides of the room and danced to Emma's playlist while May clapped from her chair and David's kids giggled at the spectacle of adults being silly. Christopher spun me around like he had in our first apartment, but this time I wasn't dizzy with the intoxication of new love. I was steady with the deeper satisfaction of love that had survived crisis and chosen itself again. That night, after everyone had gone home and Emma had returned to her dorm, Christopher and I cleaned up together in comfortable quiet. The house felt different than it had a year ago, not just because we'd rearranged some furniture or updated the paint, but because it was inhabited by people who knew each other more completely. Getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had laugh lines around her eyes and silver threads in her hair that hadn't been there when this story began. She looked older certainly, but also more real somehow, less polished but more genuine. Christopher was already in bed when I joined him, reading a book about sustainable gardening that he'd picked up somewhere. The sight of him there, solid and present and no longer carrying invisible burdens, made my chest feel warm and full. I settled beside him, close enough to feel his warmth but not demanding immediate attention. The house hummed around us, the refrigerator cycling on, the heater adjusting to the cool October night, the familiar settling sounds of a home where people had chosen to stay and build something together. I wasn't the past, I whispered into the soft darkness. I was the life. Christopher set down his book and turned toward me, his eyes serious but peaceful. "Yes," he said simply. "You were always the life." And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed him completely. Not because he was telling me what I wanted to hear, but because we'd finally learned to tell each other the truth. The empty wooden box became an unexpected compass for our new beginning. In the weeks that followed the burning ceremony, Christopher and I moved around each other with the careful attention of people learning to dance together for the first time. Not the passionate urgency of newlyweds, but something more deliberate, the conscious choice to build intimacy from honesty rather than habit. Our first new ritual emerged organically on a Tuesday evening when neither of us felt like eating alone. Christopher appeared in the kitchen doorway as I contemplated the contents of our refrigerator, both of us still navigating the strange politeness that had replaced our easy familiarity. "Want to cook something together?" he asked, his voice carrying the tentative quality of someone testing uncertain ground. We settled on pasta. Simple enough to manage without elaborate coordination, complex enough to require actual collaboration. I chopped vegetables while he prepared the sauce, our movements creating a careful choreography around each other. When our hands brushed reaching for the same wooden spoon, neither of us pulled away immediately. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. "Emma called," Christopher mentioned, stirring the simmering tomatoes. "She wants to know if we're acting normal again for her birthday next month." "What did you tell her?" "That we're working on a new version of normal. One that might actually be better than the old one." Dinner tasted different that night. Not because the food was exceptional, but because we'd created it together without pretending everything was fine. We talked about Emma's college applications, the neighbor's new fence, the weather forecast. Ordinary conversations that felt extraordinary because we were having them as people who'd decided to stop lying to each other. Walking became our second ritual. Short loops around our neighborhood at first, then longer routes that took us past the elementary school where Emma had learned to ride a bike, the park where we'd had countless family picnics, the coffee shop where we sometimes stopped for weekend breakfast. These walks felt like reclaiming familiar territory, seeing our shared landscape through eyes that were no longer clouded by secrets. "I used to wonder if you were happy," Christopher said during one of these walks, 3 weeks after the letter burning. "Really happy, not just content or comfortable." I was too afraid to ask because I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Were you happy?" I asked in return. He considered this for several steps before answering. "I was happy in moments. Watching you teach Emma to braid her hair, seeing you laugh at terrible movies, the way you hummed while folding laundry. But I was carrying so much guilt about Ashley that I couldn't let myself be completely present for the happiness." These conversations felt like archaeological excavations, carefully uncovering layers of our relationship that had been buried under years of polite avoidance and comfortable assumptions. The couple's therapy began in November, in Dr. Martinez's office with its soft lighting and strategically placed tissue boxes. I'd resisted the idea initially. Therapy felt like admitting failure, like broadcasting our private struggles to a stranger. But our first session revealed how much we'd been trying to solve complex emotional problems with insufficient tools. "Guilt is a particularly insidious emotion," Dr. Martinez explained during our third visit. "It convinces us that suffering in silence is somehow noble, that protecting others from difficult truths is an act of love. But silence often causes more damage than honesty." Christopher nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I thought I was protecting Jessica by not telling her about Ashley. I thought I was being a good husband by carrying that burden alone." "And Jessica," Dr. Martinez turned to me, "how did it feel to discover that protection? Like being told I wasn't strong enough to handle the truth. Like 18 years of partnership was actually me living in a carefully constructed fantasy while Christopher dealt with the real complexities alone." The sessions forced us to examine patterns we'd never questioned. Christopher's tendency to withdraw when facing emotional difficulty. My habit of smoothing over conflicts before we'd actually resolved them. The way we'd both learned to interpret silence as peace rather than recognizing it as avoidance. The journal started as an assignment from Dr. Martinez but evolved into something deeply personal. I bought a simple composition notebook and wrote things that still matter on the cover in careful block letters. Some entries were single words: coffee, Emma's laugh, honesty. Other days, whole pages poured out. Reflections on memories that felt different now, observations about Christopher that I'd never articulated, questions about what kind of marriage we were building. Spring brought unexpected lightness. Christopher started singing in the shower again, old songs I hadn't heard in years. I found myself actually listening when he told stories about his workday instead of just waiting for my turn to speak. 1 year later, we hosted our first family dinner since the crisis. Emma was home from college. May brought her famous apple pie, and Christopher's brother David came with his family. The afternoon unfolded with surprising naturalness. Laughter filling the house, Emma playing DJ, everyone dancing in the living room after dinner like we used to do when Emma was small. That night, after everyone had gone home, Christopher and I cleaned up together in comfortable quiet. Getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had laugh lines and silver threads that hadn't been there when this story began. She looked older but more real, less polished but more genuine. I settled beside Christopher in bed, close enough to feel his warmth. The house hummed around us with familiar settling sounds of a home where people had chosen to stay and build something together. I wasn't the past, I whispered into the soft darkness. I was the life. Christopher set down his book and turned toward me, his eyes serious but peaceful. Yes, he said simply. You were always the life. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I believed him completely, not because he was telling me what I wanted to hear, but because we'd finally learned to tell each other the truth. If this story of love, betrayal, and redemption had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jessica left those letters on the breakfast table with that simple, powerful note. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more emotional stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.
I'm Abigail Mitchell, 34, and my family just banned me from our annual reunion. They claimed I bring down the mood with my ordinary life choices. Little did they know, the luxurious Nantucket Beach house they chose for their gathering was actually mine. My beloved grandmother Martha secretly left it to me before she passed. While they thought they were excluding me from their perfect family portrait, they were actually walking straight into my property. I decided to let them settle in before making my entrance. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe to join me on this journey of sweet, unexpected justice. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant living under a microscope. Every achievement was measured, every flaw magnified. Our family photos might have looked perfect on the outside, coordinated outfits on pristine lawns, but behind those smiles was a ruthless hierarchy that placed me firmly at the bottom. My mother, Pamela, was the architect of our family's social image. A former beauty queen who married well, she dedicated her life to maintaining appearances. Her criticism came gift-wrapped in sweet tones. Abigail, honey, have you considered highlights? They might distract from your fuller face. Or that bookstore job is so cute, but when are you going to find something with actual growth potential? Nothing I did ever met her standards, especially when compared to my siblings. My father, Gregory, was physically present, but emotionally absent. A corporate attorney who measured life in billable hours and acquisitions, he saw family as another asset to manage. His rare moments of attention came when I brought home straight A's, which earned me a distracted good job, without looking up from his phone. When I opened my bookstore instead of pursuing law like my brother, he stopped asking about my career entirely. Then there was Jason, my older brother by 3 years. The golden child. Harvard law graduate. Junior partner at a prestigious firm by 30. His wedding to Melissa, a dermatologist from a good family, my mother's highest praise, was featured in a regional magazine. Jason never missed an opportunity to remind me how simple it would be to get my life together if I just applied myself. My younger sister Tiffany completed our family portrait. 2 years my junior, she followed in our mother's beauty queen footsteps before building a social media empire based on fashion and authentic living. Ironic, considering nothing about her carefully filtered life was authentic. With her 1 million followers came sponsorships, a clothing line, and my parents' undivided approval. And then there was me, the middle child who loved books more than status, who opened a small independent bookstore that barely broke even some months, but filled my heart completely. My bookish corner became my sanctuary, a place where stories mattered more than appearances. You're living beneath your potential, my mother would say during our monthly family dinners, which felt more like performance reviews. Do you know the Henderson's daughter just made partner at her firm? And she's 2 years younger than you. Family gatherings were exercises in endurance. I still remember my 30th birthday dinner, when Jason announced Melissa's pregnancy moments after I blew out my candles. Now we finally have something significant to celebrate, my mother had said, as if on cue. The only person who ever truly saw me was grandmother Martha. My father's mother, she was the family rebel, A woman who married for love instead of status and never quite fit my mother's vision for the Mitchell family image. In her modest home filled with books and art, I found acceptance. "They're all so busy looking at their reflections they can't see what's real," she told me once, while we baked cookies in her kitchen. "You see the world through different eyes, Abby. That's your gift, not your flaw." When Martha was diagnosed with cancer 3 years ago, I was the one who drove her to appointments, organized her medications, and read to her when her eyes grew too tired. My siblings sent flowers and made brief appearances when it was convenient. My parents hired nurses, but rarely visited themselves. "They're just busy." I'd make excuses for them, but Martha would just squeeze my hand knowingly. "Some people are too busy for what matters most," she'd reply. "Don't be like them, Abby." I promised her I wouldn't, though I still desperately sought my family's approval. Even after opening my bookstore, fulfilling my lifelong dream, I would casually mention our bestseller displays or literary events, hoping for some acknowledgement. Instead, I'd get comments like, "That's nice, but have you thought about what you'll do when it fails?" from my father, or "At least it keeps you occupied," from my mother. After particularly brutal family gatherings, I'd drive home in tears, wondering what was wrong with me. Why couldn't I just be what they wanted? Why wasn't my happiness enough? Martha was the only one who celebrated my victories and comforted my defeats. When she passed away last year, I felt truly alone in my family for the first time. I didn't know then that Martha had one final way of showing me I was never alone at all. The call from Tiffany came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was unpacking a new shipment of historical fiction. My phone lit up with her name, and I felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that accompanied any family interaction. "Hey, Abby," she said, her voice carrying that syrupy sweetness that always preceded something unpleasant. "Just calling to let you know we're planning the annual family reunion for the second weekend in July." "Oh, great," I replied, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I continued shelving books. "Where are we going this year? Please don't say another wine tour. Dad got so pretentious last time." The pause that followed lasted just a beat too long. "Well, that's sort of why I'm calling," Tiffany continued. "Mom and Dad think it might be better if you sit this one out." My hand froze midair, a copy of The Great Gatsby suspended between shelf and cart. "What do you mean?" "It's just that," she sighed dramatically. "These gatherings are supposed to be celebrations, and you always seem so unhappy. Mom says you bring down the mood with your comments about your struggling bookstore and your single status. Jason thought it might be better for everyone if we just had, how did he put it, a more harmonious dynamic this year." The book slipped from my fingers, landing with a thud on the hardwood floor. "You're uninviting me from the family reunion?" My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. "Don't be so dramatic, Abby. We're just suggesting maybe you take this year to focus on yourself. Maybe work on getting your business profitable, or try that dating app one told you about." Her voice brightened artificially. "We're renting this amazing beach house in Nantucket. Super exclusive. Costs a fortune, but Dad says we deserve it after the year we've all had." "The year you've all had," I echoed. "What about the year I've had?" "I lost Grandma too, Tiffany. I was the one who was actually there with her." "See, this is exactly what I mean. You always make everything so heavy." Tiffany's voice took on that patronizing tone she'd perfected. "Anyway, I should go. I have a conference call with my sponsors in 5 minutes. Love you." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me standing in the middle of my bookstore, surrounded by stories of people overcoming obstacles while I couldn't even stand up to my own family. That night, I cried until my eyes were swollen. I called my best friend Haley, who came over immediately with ice cream and righteous indignation. "They did what?" she practically shouted when I explained the situation. "Your own family uninvited you from the reunion? That's beyond cruel, Abby. That's emotional abuse." "Maybe they're right," I said quietly, digging my spoon into the mint chocolate chip. "I do bring down the mood. I'm not successful like them." Haley grabbed my shoulders. "Stop it right now. You built a business from nothing. You followed your passion. You were there for your grandmother when no one else was. The problem isn't you, Abby. It's them and their twisted values. I nodded, but didn't quite believe it. Years of conditioning are hard to break. 2 days later, I was having coffee with our mutual friend Stephanie, who was cousins with Melissa, Jason's wife. Her expression was uncomfortable as she slid her phone across the table. "I thought you should see this," she said gently. Melissa added me to the family reunion planning chat. "I'm so sorry, Abby." I scrolled through dozens of messages discussing accommodation details, meal plans, and activities, all punctuated with excited emojis and inside jokes. Messages from my parents, Jason, Tiffany, and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone except me. The beach house rental is confirmed. My father had written. 8 bedrooms, oceanfront property, private beach access. Top of the line, everything. Melissa had replied, "It's absolutely perfect. The photos look amazing. So glad we decided to splurge this year." My mother, "We deserve it. Quality family time in a quality setting." Then Tiffany, "Just us this time. No negative energy to deal with." A laughing emoji from Jason followed by, "Peace at last." I handed the phone back to Stephanie, my hands shaking slightly. "Thanks for showing me. What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to show up anyway and confront them. Another part wants to just let it go. "Whatever you decide, I'm on your side," Stephanie assured me. And for what it's worth, Melissa feels uncomfortable about the whole thing. She told me privately she thinks they're being too harsh. That afternoon at the bookstore, I couldn't focus. I kept misplacing books, getting inventory counts wrong, and zoning out mid-conversation with customers. After closing, I sat at my reading nook by the window, staring out at the street as dusk fell. The address of the beach house from the group chat kept floating through my mind. Something about it seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. Nantucket wasn't a place I'd visited often. Only once, actually, with grandmother Martha when I was in college. That's when it hit me. The address. The location. It couldn't be, could it? With trembling fingers, I pulled out the folder I kept in my desk. The one with all the paperwork Mr. Jenkins had given me after grandmother Martha's will was read. I flipped through the documents until I found the property deed. 43 Seashell Lane, Nantucket, Massachusetts. The exact address my family had booked for their exclusive reunion. I stared at the paper, my mind racing. They had no idea they had rented my house. My property. The beach house Martha had left me in secret. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. The day grandmother Martha told me about the beach house remains crystal clear in my memory. It was 3 weeks before she passed away, during one of our quiet afternoons together. The hospice nurse had just left, and Martha asked me to bring her the small wooden box she kept on her dresser. "I have something to tell you, Abby," she said, her once strong voice now a whisper. "Something just between us." I sat beside her, holding her fragile hand as she told me about the beach house in Nantucket, a property my grandfather had purchased decades ago as an investment. The family knew about it, of course, but what they didn't know was that Grandpa Joseph had put it solely in Martha's name before he died. "Your father thinks it's going to be divided among all of you grandchildren," she explained. "Your parents assume it will be sold and the money distributed. But it's mine to give, and I'm giving it to you." "Martha, I can't accept that," I protested. "It should be shared." Her blue eyes, still sharp despite her illness, fixed on mine. "Listen to me carefully, Abigail. I've watched how they treat you. I've seen you shrink smaller every year under their judgment. This house is my statement that I see your worth even if they don't." She squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "But there's a condition. Don't tell them right away. Wait until you're ready. Wait until you can stand before them as the strong woman I know you are, not seeking their approval but offering your compassion from a position of power." 2 weeks after the funeral, Mr. Jenkins, Martha's attorney for over 30 years, met me at a coffee shop across town. He slid a thick envelope across the table. Martha was very specific about her wishes, he explained, his kind eyes watching me carefully. The beach house transfer has already been processed. We've set up a management company to handle the rental aspects if you choose to continue that arrangement. Your family doesn't need to know until you're ready to tell them. I opened the envelope with shaking hands, finding the deed, keys, and detailed information about the property, a 5,000 square foot oceanfront home valued at nearly $4 million. Photos showed a stunning white clapboard house with blue shutters, wraparound porches, and panoramic ocean views. Why would she do this? I whispered, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the gift. Martha talked about you constantly, Mr. Jenkins said gently. She believed in you completely. She worried your family's expectations were crushing your spirit. I drove to Nantucket the following weekend, using the keys to enter what was now my house for the first time as its owner. Standing in the grand entryway with its sweeping staircase and ocean views through floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt like an imposter. The house was beautiful. 8 bedrooms, each with their own bathroom, a gourmet kitchen that opened to a massive living area, multiple decks and balconies, and steps leading directly to a private beach. It was decorated in classic New England coastal style, whites and blues, weathered woods, and tasteful nautical touches. I wandered from room to room, running my fingers along bookshelves filled with classics, examining family photos Martha had placed throughout the house. In the master suite, I found a framed photo of Martha and me from my college graduation, both of us beaming at the camera, her arm around my shoulders. That night, I slept in the master bedroom, listening to the waves crash against the shore. I cried for Martha, for her absence, for her belief in me that I didn't share. Over the next several months, I worked with the management company Martha had arranged. The house had been a successful vacation rental for years, booked most summer weekends at premium rates. I decided to continue this arrangement, with the company handling all interactions with renters, so my name remained private. I used some of the rental income to renovate certain areas of the house, updating bathrooms, replacing furniture, and most importantly, creating a library in what had been a rarely used sitting room. I lined the walls with custom bookshelves and filled them with my favorite titles, adding comfortable reading chairs and good lighting. It became my favorite room in the house, the place I felt Martha's presence most strongly. The management company set up an LLC to handle all transactions, with Mr. Jenkins serving as the official contact. My name appeared nowhere in the rental listings or property records accessible to the public. It was a level of privacy Martha had arranged specifically to give me time. When you're ready, her letter had said, this house will be your strength, not a weapon. Use it wisely, dear one. For almost a year, I kept my ownership secret, visiting occasionally during vacant periods. I told no one except Haley, who understood the complicated emotions surrounding the inheritance. I wasn't ready to face my family's reactions, their inevitable attempts to challenge the will, their accusations of manipulation, their sudden interest in a relationship with me. I wasn't ready until they unknowingly booked my house for the reunion they'd banned me from attending. When Stephanie showed me the screenshots from the family reunion chat, I immediately recognized the property photos. The distinctive blue shutters, the unique driftwood sculpture in the foyer, the reading nook window seat I'd added during renovations. They were photos of my house taken from the rental listing. Is something wrong? Stephanie asked, noticing my shocked expression. No, I said quickly. Nothing's wrong. I just need to verify something. That evening, I called the management company. Yes, Ms. Mitchell, I can confirm that booking, said Claire, my account manager. Your family requested the property from July 15th through the 22nd. The deposit has been processed and everything is arranged per your standard rental agreement. And they have no idea who owns the property? I asked. None whatsoever. As always, all communications go through our company. Your name doesn't appear on any documents they would see. I thanked her and hung up, then sat in stunned silence in my apartment above the bookstore. The situation was almost too perfectly ironic to be real. My family had excluded me from their gathering, only to unknowingly choose my property as their venue. What would Martha want me to do with this opportunity? The question haunted me as I paced my small living room. The easy answer would be revenge. Let them settle in, then dramatically reveal myself as the owner and evict them. The fantasy was temptingly satisfying. I imagined their shocked faces, their stammered apologies, their embarrassment. But that wasn't what Martha had wanted for me. "This house will be your strength, not a weapon," she had written. I called Haley, who came over immediately when she heard the tension in my voice. "You're not going to believe this," I told her, explaining the situation. Her eyes widened. "This is incredible. It's like the universe is handing you the perfect revenge scenario on a silver platter." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Part of me wants to just let them have their reunion and never tell them. Another part wants to show up and throw them all out." Haley sat across from me at my kitchen table, her expression thoughtful. "What would give you peace, Abby?" "Not temporary satisfaction, but actual peace." I considered her question carefully. "I think I need to stop being invisible to them. I need them to see me, really see me, maybe for the first time." "Then that's what you should do," she said simply. "Use this opportunity not for revenge, but for revelation." The next day, I called Mr. Jenkins to discuss the legal implications. "As the property owner, you have every right to be there," he confirmed. Though I would advise against any confrontational approach that could escalate to authorities being called. Family disputes can get messy quickly. "I don't want a scene," I assured him. "I just want to finally be honest with them and with myself." Over the next few days, a plan began to form. I wouldn't prevent them from having their reunion, but I would join it, on my terms, in my house. I would finally stand my ground, not as the family disappointment, but as a woman who had built a life true to herself. I spent hours journaling, processing years of emotions, trying to untangle what I wanted to say from the hurt that had accumulated over decades. I realized I didn't want them to feel ashamed or humiliated. I wanted them to recognize the pain their actions had caused. I wanted accountability, not revenge. "I think Martha knew this day would come," I told Haley as we walked along the river near my bookstore. "She gave me this house as a way to finally level the playing field with my family." "Or maybe," Haley suggested, "she gave you the house because she believed you deserved it, and this situation is just a bonus opportunity for growth." I nodded, considering her words. Either way, I need to do this. I need to stop hiding and hoping they'll suddenly change. I need to show up as myself, fully and without apology. As the reunion date approached, my determination grew stronger. This wasn't about getting even. It was about getting free from their expectations, from my need for their approval, from the narrative they had written about who I was. For once, I would write my own story. With 2 weeks until the reunion, I notified my assistant manager Zoe that I would be taking time off. "I have some important family business to handle," I explained, the words feeling strange yet empowering. "About time," she replied with a knowing smile. "Take all the time you need. The store will be fine." I made an appointment with Dr. Larson, the therapist I'd been seeing sporadically since Martha's death. I needed to ensure my motivations were clear and my emotional state stable before confronting my family. "What I'm hearing," she said after I explained the situation, "is that you're not seeking revenge, but recognition. There's a significant difference." "Exactly," I nodded. "I don't want to hurt them. I just want them to see me, really see me." "And if they still don't?" she asked gently. "What then?" It was the question I'd been avoiding. "Then at least I'll know I stood up for myself. That I honored Martha's belief in me." Dr. Larson smiled. "That sounds like the perspective of someone who is finally finding her worth from within, not from others' validation." I left her office feeling lighter, more certain of my path. The next step was practical preparation. I wanted to look and feel my best, not to impress my family, but to armor myself with confidence. I spent an afternoon shopping with Haley, searching for the perfect outfit. "You need something that says, 'I own this place,' literally and figuratively," Haley joked as we browsed through boutiques. We eventually found it, a simple but elegant blue sundress that matched the color of the ocean visible from the house's windows. I paired it with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only jewelry she had specifically left to me in her will. Perfect, Haley declared when I tried on the complete outfit. You look powerful, but not like you're trying too hard. I coordinated with Claire at the management company to arrange specific details for the reunion weekend. The house would be stocked with groceries and essentials as usual, but I requested some personal touches, fresh flowers and arrangements Martha had always loved, her favorite cookies from the local bakery, and selected photos of her placed meaningfully throughout the house. I'll be arriving the day before the guests, I informed Claire. I'd like to prepare the house personally. Of course, Ms. Mitchell. It's your property. Her words sent a small thrill through me. My property.
Mean it.
In the days leading up to the reunion, I practiced what I wanted to say. Standing before my bathroom mirror, I rehearsed my entrance, my responses to their inevitable shock, the boundaries I would establish. I'm Abigail Mitchell, I said to my reflection. I am the owner of this house. I am worthy of respect. Each repetition made the words feel more true. I packed carefully. Enough clothes for a week, important documents proving my ownership, and several meaningful items that represented my authentic self. Books I'd loved, a photo album of my bookstore's growth, Martha's handwritten recipes. The night before I was set to leave, Haley came over for moral support. Are you nervous? She asked as we shared takeout Chinese food in my living room. Terrified, I admitted. But also, ready? Does that make sense? She nodded. It makes perfect sense. You've been preparing for this moment longer than you realize. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with scenarios, imagining their reactions, rehearsing my responses. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I loaded my car, took one last look at my apartment, and began the drive to Nantucket. The ferry crossing was calm, the July morning bright and clear. As the island came into view, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. Whatever happened in the next few days, I was finally taking control of my narrative. I arrived at the beach house by noon, using my key to enter what truly was my home. The management company had prepared everything perfectly. The house was immaculate. Vases of fresh hydrangeas and lilies adorned various surfaces, and Martha's favorite cookies were arranged on a platter in the kitchen. I walked through each room slowly, touching furniture, adjusting photos, claiming the space as mine. In the library, I ran my fingers along the spines of books I'd carefully selected. In the master bedroom, I unpacked my clothes into drawers and closets that rightfully belonged to me. On the bedside table, I placed the photo of Martha and me from my graduation, positioning it so it would be the first thing I saw each morning. I'm doing this, Grandma, I whispered to her smiling image. I'm finally standing up for myself. As evening approached, I sat on the back deck watching the sunset over the ocean, mentally preparing for tomorrow's confrontation. My family would arrive around noon, expecting a luxury rental and a week of self-congratulatory bonding without the family disappointment to bring down the mood. Instead, they would find me, not as the person they had dismissed, but as the woman Martha had always seen, strong, worthy, and finally ready to claim her place. I woke early the next morning, the gentle sound of waves replacing my usual alarm. After a quiet breakfast on the deck and a walk along the private beach, I prepared for my family's arrival. I chose a strategic observation point, the window seat in the upstairs hallway that overlooked the circular driveway. From there, I could watch unseen as they arrived. At precisely 12:15 p.m., the first car pulled into the driveway, my parents' sleek black Mercedes. My father emerged first, surveying the property with appreciative eyes, while my mother adjusted her designer sunglasses and smoothed her linen pants. Even from a distance, I could see their impressed expressions as they took in the grand facade of the house. Gregory, it's even more beautiful than the photos, my mother's voice carried up to my window. Tiffany found an absolute gem. My father nodded, already checking his phone. At these rates, it better be perfect. They wheeled their expensive luggage to the front door, using the entry code the management company had provided. I heard their footsteps and exclamations as they entered the foyer below. Look at this place. My mother's voice echoed through the house. The moldings alone must have cost a fortune. 10 minutes later, Jason and Melissa arrived with their 3-year-old son Parker. Jason parked his Range Rover beside our parents' car and immediately began taking photos of the house. "This will look great on the firm's Instagram," he said to Melissa. "Partner retreats in style." Melissa seemed more concerned with corralling Parker, who was already running toward the beach. "It's gorgeous," she agreed distractedly. "Parker, wait for mommy." The last to arrive was Tiffany, pulling up in her white convertible, oversized sunglasses perched on her head. Before even retrieving her luggage, she positioned herself in front of the house for a selfie, pouting artfully at her phone. "Hello, content for the next week," she sang to herself. "The followers are going to eat this up." Within an hour, they had all entered the house and begun exploring. I moved silently from my window seat to the top of the stairs, listening to their conversations below. "I call the master suite," my father announced, as if it were his right. "There's a bedroom on the 3rd floor with its own balcony," Jason called out. "Melissa, and I will take that one." "Is there good lighting in the east bedrooms?" Tiffany asked no one in particular. "I need natural light for my morning skincare routine videos." They continued claiming spaces, exploring rooms, and making comments about the furnishings, sometimes appreciative, sometimes critical, always entitled. Not once did anyone mention my absence or express that they missed my presence. "Who put all these books in this room?" My mother's voice drifted up from the library. "It's a bit much, isn't it?" This could have been another entertainment space. "Some of these titles are actually valuable first editions," my father responded, his voice carrying the tone he used when assessing assets. "Smart investment by the owner." "Speaking of smart," Jason chimed in, "have you seen the rental agreement? This place goes for $30,000 a week during peak season. Dad, we should look into investment properties like this. The ROI must be incredible." I watched from various hidden vantage points as they settled in, my parents arranging their toiletries in the master bathroom, Melissa setting up Parker's portable crib in their chosen room, Tiffany reorganizing furniture to create better backgrounds for her social media posts. "Should we do a seafood boil tonight?" my mother suggested as they all congregated in the kitchen. "I saw some gorgeous lobster at the market on our way in." "Perfect for my content calendar," Tiffany agreed, already planning camera angles. "Luxury family dinner with ocean sunset?" "Yes, please." "I'll handle the wine pairing," my father offered. The rental description mentioned a premium wine fridge in the butler's pantry. As they discussed dinner plans, I slipped into the master bedroom, my bedroom, and retrieved the photo of Martha and me, placing it prominently on the console table in the main living area. A small declaration of presence they had yet to notice. By late afternoon, they had fully claimed the space. My father and Jason were drinking scotch on the back deck, discussing investment strategies. My mother and Melissa were preparing dinner in the kitchen, while Tiffany arranged a charcuterie board, stopping frequently to take photos for her Instagram. "This is exactly what we needed," I heard my mother say to Melissa. "Just quality time with the successful branches of the family." "Do you think Abby's upset about not being invited?" Melissa asked, her voice lower. My mother sighed. "Abigail always finds something to be upset about. This week is about celebrating achievement, not managing her feelings about her life choices." "Still," Melissa persisted, "she is family." "Sometimes family means knowing when to create distance," my mother replied dismissively. "Now, pass me that serving platter, the Wedgwood one. It'll look better for Tiffany's photos." Their words stung, but not as deeply as they once would have. I felt oddly detached, like an anthropologist observing a strange culture rather than a daughter hearing her mother's dismissal. As evening approached, they gathered on the deck for dinner. Through the glass doors, I watched them toast to family success and another exceptional year for the Mitchells. They looked perfect in the golden sunset light, beautiful people in beautiful clothes in a beautiful setting, creating a beautiful illusion. I took a deep breath and realized it was time. Time to step into the light, into my truth, into my power. I opened the deck door and stepped outside. The conversation at the table stopped abruptly as I appeared. 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, expressions morphing from confusion to shock. Abby. My mother recovered first, her voice pitched higher than normal. What are you doing here? How did you get in? I smiled, feeling strangely calm despite my racing heart. Hello, everyone. Lovely evening for a family dinner, isn't it? My father stood up, his lawyer face firmly in place. Abigail, this is inappropriate. If Tiffany explained the situation to you, you know this is a private family gathering. I'm well aware of what was explained to me, Dad. I moved to the empty chair at the head of the table. Martha's chair, now mine. But there seems to be some confusion about whose gathering this actually is. Jason's face darkened. What are you talking about? And seriously, how did you get in here? Did you follow us? This is technically breaking and entering. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys, placing them deliberately on the table. It's not breaking and entering when you have keys to your own property, Jason. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the waves seemed to pause. What exactly are you saying? My mother finally asked, her voice dangerously controlled. I'm saying, I replied, meeting her gaze steadily, that you're currently enjoying dinner at my house. I own this property. Grandmother Martha left it to me in her will last year. Disbelief, then calculation, crossed their faces in rapid succession. That's impossible, my father declared. Mother's estate was settled. The beach house was to be sold, and the proceeds divided among all the grandchildren. That was the assumption. I agreed. But not the reality. Martha left this house specifically to me, with explicit instructions that I wasn't to tell anyone until I was ready. I reached for the folder I'd placed nearby earlier, sliding out the property deed and placing it on the table. You're welcome to examine the documentation. Mr. Jenkins handled everything legally and thoroughly. Jason snatched up the papers, his attorney eyes scanning rapidly. This has to be a mistake. Or a forgery. Why would Grandma leave her most valuable asset just to you? Because she wanted to, I said simply. Because she saw how this family treated me. Because she wanted me to have something that was just mine. This is ridiculous, Tiffany interjected, her perfect features contorted with indignation. You must have manipulated her when she was sick. That's the only explanation. Is it, Tiffany? I asked quietly. Is it so hard to believe that someone in this family valued me exactly as I am? We've always supported you, Abigail, my mother said with practiced sincerity. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. No, I contradicted her gently. You've wanted what you think is best for your family image. There's a difference. My father, ever the pragmatist, was already shifting strategies. Well, this is unexpected. But in a way, it's wonderful news. Our Abby, a property owner. I always knew you had it in you to step up. Did you? I asked, genuinely curious. Because from where I've been sitting for the past 34 years, you've made it very clear that you thought I was a disappointment. That's not fair, he protested, but his eyes slid away from mine. Actually, I think it's perfectly fair, I countered. Just like it was fair to exclude me from this reunion because I bring down the mood with my ordinary life. Melissa, who had remained silent until now, looked genuinely uncomfortable. I told them it wasn't right to exclude you, she said quietly. For what it's worth. Thank you, Melissa, I acknowledged. I appreciate that. So what now? Jason demanded, tossing the deed back onto the table. You show up to gloat and throw us out? Is that the grand plan? Revenge for not being invited? No, Jason. That's what you might do, but it's not what I'm doing. I took a deep breath. I'm not asking you to leave. This reunion can continue exactly as planned. I'm simply joining it, in my house on my terms. My mother's perfectly maintained composure began to crack. You can't be serious. After everything, you expect us to just… What? Pretend this ambush didn't happen? I don't expect you to pretend anything, I replied. I expect you to acknowledge the truth about this house, about how you've treated me, about the family dynamics we've all been playing out for decades. No more pretending. That's all I'm asking. Tiffany, ever the opportunist, suddenly brightened. This is actually amazing. My followers would love this story. Reunited with my sister in her secret beach house inheritance. We could do a whole series of reconciliation content. No, Tiffany, I said firmly. This isn't content. This is my life. And I'm not interested in being a prop in your curated reality. Her face fell. I was just trying to find the positive angle. The positive angle, I explained, would be genuinely reconnecting as a family, without cameras, without performance, without status calculations. My father, ever the negotiator, leaned forward. Let's all take a breath. Clearly, there have been misunderstandings. But we're family and families work through these things. Abby, you have every right to be upset about the reunion situation. Perhaps we were hasty in our decision. This isn't just about the reunion, Dad. This is about a lifetime of conditional love and impossible standards. This is about being treated as less than because I chose a different path than the one you mapped out. We've always loved you, my mother interjected, her voice wavering between defensiveness and hurt. I believe you have, I conceded. But you haven't respected me. There's a difference. The conversation continued into the night, sometimes heated, sometimes tearful, occasionally even productive. Old wounds were exposed, painful truths acknowledged. Jason remained largely defensive. Tiffany fluctuated between opportunism and genuine moments of connection, and my parents oscillated between denial and glimpses of real understanding. Around midnight, as the emotional exhaustion began to take its toll, I stood up from the table. It's late, and this is a lot to process for everyone. You all know your room assignments, though I should mention that the master suite is actually mine. I smiled slightly at my parents' expressions. But you're welcome to use it this week. I'll take one of the guest rooms. As I turned to leave, my father called after me. Abby, wait. I need to ask. Why did you let us come here? Why not just cancel the reservation when you saw it was us? I considered his question carefully. Because Martha didn't give me this house as a weapon. She gave it to me as a foundation, a place to stand firmly and speak my truth. That's what I'm doing. As I climbed the stairs to my chosen bedroom, I heard them continue talking below, their voices more subdued, more thoughtful than I could remember hearing in years. Whatever happened next, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my life, I was visible to my family. Truly visible. And that visibility had come not from contorting myself to fit their expectations, but from standing firmly in my own truth. Martha would have been proud. The next morning, I woke early and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. To my surprise, my father was already there, staring out at the ocean with a pensive expression. Morning, I said, startling him from his thoughts. Abby. He nodded, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I couldn't sleep much. That makes two of us. We stood in awkward silence as the coffee brewed. Finally, he spoke. Your grandmother was an extraordinary woman, he said quietly. She always saw things the rest of us missed. I nodded, unsure where he was going with this. I didn't appreciate that enough when she was alive, he continued. I was too focused on what I thought success should look like. He turned to face me directly. I think I've made the same mistake with you. The vulnerability in his expression caught me off guard. My father, Gregory Mitchell, who measured life in acquisitions and achievements, was showing genuine regret. It's not too late to see things differently, I offered cautiously. He nodded, then reached into his pocket. I found this in the master bathroom last night. I'm guessing you put it there. He handed me a small envelope with my name written in Martha's distinctive handwriting. I didn't, I said, confused. I had no idea this was here. The envelope contained a short letter from Martha, dated just weeks before her death. Dear Abby, if you're reading this, you've finally claimed your place in the house and in your life. There are similar letters for each family member hidden throughout this house, places only they would look. My final attempt at bringing healing to this family I've loved so imperfectly. Gregory will find his in his favorite fishing spot. Pamela's is with her reflection. Jason's is where ambition sleeps, and Tiffany's where appearances matter most. Asterisk, let them find their letters in their own time. Your job isn't to fix this family, it's to be authentically yourself within it. Asterisk, with eternal love and faith in you. Asterisk, Martha. Asterisk, I looked up at my father, tears blurring my vision. She left letters for everyone. She did, he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Mine was in the tackle box in the boathouse. I found it last night when I went walking to clear my head. What did it say? I asked, then quickly added, if you want to share. He was quiet for a moment. It said that success without connection is an empty achievement. That she was proud of what I'd built, but worried about what I'd sacrificed to build it. His eyes met mine. She told me to really see you, not for who I wanted you to be, but for who you actually are. By mid-morning, everyone had gathered in the living room. The atmosphere was markedly different from the previous evening, subdued, thoughtful, tentative. My mother had found her letter in a jewelry box in the master bathroom. Jason discovered his tucked into the desk in the study. Tiffany's was hidden in the antique vanity in her room. Martha always was several steps ahead of everyone else, my mother said, her carefully applied makeup not quite hiding the evidence of tears. Even from beyond, she's orchestrating family interventions. I'd like to share something with you all, I said, taking a deep breath. Something I've never told you, because I didn't think you'd understand or care. I described my bookstore, not as the struggling business they assumed it was, but as the thriving community hub it had become. I shared stories of the reading programs we developed for underprivileged children, the author events that drew crowds from neighboring towns, the book club that had helped elderly residents combat loneliness. I'm not rich by your standards, I concluded. But I've built something meaningful, something that matters to me and to my community. That's my success story. The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had as a family. For perhaps the first time, we spoke honestly about expectations and disappointments, about miscommunications and assumptions, about the gap between who we presented ourselves to be and who we actually were. Jason admitted the pressure he felt to maintain his perfect life image. Some days I envy your freedom, Abby. My life looks impressive from the outside, but most days it's just exhausting. Tiffany revealed that her social media empire was deeply in debt. I'm one algorithm change away from financial disaster, but I can't let anyone see that. The brand has to look perfect even when I'm falling apart. My mother spoke of her own mother's criticism, the generational pattern of impossible standards. I thought I was helping you by pushing you. I didn't realize I was repeating the very patterns that hurt me. Not everything was resolved in that conversation, or even during that week. Jason still made occasionally dismissive comments about my simple life. Tiffany couldn't resist turning some moments into content for her followers. My parents slipped into old patterns of judgment when their guard was down. But something fundamental had changed. We were finally seeing each other. Imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely. On the last evening of the reunion, we gathered on the beach for a bonfire. As the flames illuminated our circle, I noticed how different we looked from the perfect family portrait my mother had always tried to create. Parker was covered in sand and sticky marshmallow. Jason had abandoned his designer clothes for worn jeans and a sweatshirt. Tiffany's phone remained untouched in her pocket. My parents sat close together, holding hands like they hadn't done in years. I've been thinking, my father said as we watched the waves in comfortable silence. This house is too special to be just a rental property most of the year. I tensed, waiting for him to suggest I sell it or turn it over to the family. It should be a family home, he continued. A place where we can all gather, together, throughout the year. If you're amenable, Abby, I'd like to discuss helping you maintain it for that purpose. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. 1 year later, we held another reunion at the beach house. This time, the invitation explicitly included everyone. The dynamics weren't perfect. We were still the Mitchells, after all, with our complicated history and ingrained patterns. But we were trying, and that effort itself was a kind of love I'd never fully experienced from my family before. The house that Martha left me had indeed become my foundation, not just financially, but emotionally. It gave me the security to stand firm in who I was, to offer connection without requiring approval, to love my family without being diminished by them. On the last night of that second reunion, I stood alone on the deck after everyone had gone to bed. Looking out at the moonlight reflecting on the waves, I felt Martha's presence beside me. "Thank you," I whispered to the night air, not just for the house, but for seeing who I could become when I finally stood in my own truth. The ocean breeze seemed to wrap around me like an embrace, carrying the whispered response I needed to hear. "I always saw you, Abby. I'm just glad you finally see yourself." What would you do if you were in Abby's situation? Would you have revealed yourself immediately, or waited like she did? Have you ever had to stand up to family who didn't see your true worth? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing in their truth is always worth it. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what we're given but what we discover within ourselves.